Okay, the red button means that we are indeed live, but you guys know the drill. We got to let it breathe. Let this stream breathe just for a couple of more seconds. Make sure it's nice and stable for our great audience out here in Broncos country. Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up podcast, presented as always by Mile High Huddle, powered by Overtime Media. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, and with me as always, my partner in crime. You know him, you love him. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, should or should not Von Miller change his jersey number to the number he wore in college and oh so temporarily in his initial months as a Bronco, the number 40? He put a poll out for those who missed it. He put a poll out over the weekend saying he's considering switching his number from 58 back to 40 because it is now okay per NFL mandate for linebackers to wear 40 numbers now, where it wasn't when he was a rookie entering the league in 2011. 75% of the audience said no, keep 58. What's your take, Zack?
Yeah, most things around the NFL, I really don't care about minuscule things like this, technical things like this, but I'm a traditionalist when it comes to jersey numbers. I really like Von or a linebacker in the 50s. 58 has just become an iconic number in Broncos lore associated with Von Miller, a future first ballot Hall of Famer, Super Bowl MVP. I mean, the guy is just an all-world type player, and he made 58 what it is today. It's a pretty nondescript number. It's not 51, it's not 55, it's not 50, it's 58, and I think he made that his. To me, fullbacks or running backs should be in the 40s. I'm very old school that way. I like things kind of how the NFL had it before they relaxed that policy. So I hope he doesn't change it.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why he went with 58 because he wasn't allowed to wear the 40 as a rookie, and he wanted to honor Derek Thomas, the Hall of Famer, former Kansas City Chief, the late, great Derek Thomas. And the reason for that, I think, was because so many draft nicks compared Von Miller to Derek Thomas when he was coming out of college at Texas A&M in 2011. So he wanted to honor it. Now, you're right, that 58 has its own luster, and I think most football fans, modern football fans, when they see the number 58, they don't think of Derek Thomas. They think of Von Miller, and it has actually passed on and beyond Von, because look what Elvis Dumervil wore when he went to the Ravens. He wore 58 to honor his buddy, Von Miller. Look what Shaq Barrett is now wearing in Tampa Bay, the number 58. So it does have a special significance. And the other aspect, Zack, is that even though there are now 3 linebackers on this roster wearing numbers in the 40s, Alexander Johnson, Josie Jewell, Joe Jones, Von's jersey is currently in the top 50 according to the NFLPA, and jersey sales sitting nice and comfortable at number 34. Now, who's to say if he were to change off of 58 to 40 that would alter his ranking? But why fix what ain't broke?
Right. And, I see a lot of comments saying it won't be wearable anymore. A lot of fans have his jersey and his T-shirts and his apparel with his number on it. He doesn't care about that. If he wants to change his jersey number, he's not taking fans' money into consideration. But my thought is this: if or when the Broncos retire his number, how would they do it with 2 numbers? It wouldn't be 58 and 40. We're not going to hang 2 numbers from the rafters. I think he knows that his lore is built around that number. He's become just a Hall of Fame player wearing number 58. So it's one of those things where there's nothing going on right now. It's the dead of the offseason. He's just looking for something to put out there, take maybe the spotlight off of the issue that we won't talk about, and kind of having some fun with the audience. I don't think he's going to do it, Chad.
Yeah, I really do think it's more about a star player just being bored and just wanting some social media interaction, because
they're like us.
Yeah, very much so. But it's been an inordinately long off season. No, I mean, not to say that he's just been sitting on his rear end. Obviously, he's been working out in San Francisco. I'm sure he's been working out individually when he's at home. But no team-oriented stuff, really. No UC Health Training Center, OTAs, no mini camps. The dude is probably bored by this point. It's basically what he's done the last 3 months, similar to us, is what he would traditionally be doing in these next 6 weeks. And so he's just bored, man. He's just been doing the same thing forever. All these guys, including Von, the best medicine at this point is just getting back out on the grass on July 28th.
Yeah, when training camp rolls around, if we have a preseason, if we have a regular season, which I think we will, this won't even be a remembrance, Chad. This is just a here and now in the June dead period kind of thing.
Well, gang, speaking of the dead period, not much happened in Bronco land today on Monday by way of news or anything fresh and particularly novel happening in Broncos country. So what we're going to do is we're going to get kind of put on our analysis hats, and we're going to talk about an interesting selection by Sports Illustrated, one of Sports Illustrated's national voices, Conor Orr, when he chose Garett Bolles as the Denver Broncos' most underrated player. He went all 32 teams, picked what player he felt was the most underrated, and for the Broncos, it was Bolles. I found that to be highly questionable, and I hate being at odds with the national voices at SI because we cover the team locally for SI. However, we got to go in on this, Zach, because I think it's not only wrong, it's dead wrong. Not to say that Garett Bolles isn't underrated in some sense, like you can make that argument, but I think there's at least 5 players that have a better case for being named the most underrated Bronco, and we're going to get to that. And I want to get your take on that as well, obviously, Zach. First, real quick, though, a couple quick matters of business. You guys know the drill. The podcast continues to grow despite being in the dead period across all platforms, and we want to make sure that our new listeners know how to connect with us on social media. Make sure you're following Huddle Up Podcast on Twitter at Huddle Up Pod. That is how you keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the podcast in real time. And while you're at it, make sure you're following the mother account at Mile High Huddle, breaking Broncos news and analysis all day long and twice on Sunday. If you're in a position, gang, check out the merch store, huddleuppod.com, if I can get it to work on the screen here. Get your swag on. Get yourself one of these Football Priest hats. Get a Football Priest t-shirt, Mile High Huddle State of Being hoodie, Huddle Up Podcast mug, face mask. We got a little something for everybody out there. Different times of the year. It's summer. You want to get yourself a what was it you made? It was what was the last thing you made? It was a tank top. Thank you. Myself.
Well, the mug was, but a piece of clothing, it was the tank top.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Anyway, little something for everybody. If you're in a position, check that out. It's another way to support what we're doing here at MHH. And if you're not in a position to do that, it's all good. We're just grateful to have you here listening, participating in the live stream, or listening to this as a podcast after the fact. 3 things you can do no matter where or how you're listening to this podcast is make sure, number 1, that you are subscribed. Make sure you like this video or this episode wherever you're listening, and then share it out there to your friends and family and help us reach other like-minded Broncos fans and help us continue to grow MHH, which has just skyrocketed over the last, I would say, 9 months into a whole new stratosphere. And it's thanks to you guys in Broncos country. It's thanks to our great listeners in our community that this thing has really just snowballed. So those 3 simple things: subscribe, like, share. You guys know the drill. We appreciate you. All right, Zach. So really quick, let's just welcome in those who were hanging out in the stream. We got Toy Mafia. We got Paul on Facebook. We got BG, Brian Greenfield in the house. Eclipse Stormborn holding it down for Broncos country, representing out in Philadelphia. Big E. We got Jody. Buana's with us, of course. Mundungus. That's a new name. I don't recognize Mundungus. Very unique handle you got there, my dog. And let's see who else we got real quick. Nathan, Talon. Welcome in, everybody. Before we dive into the main subject matter, I just want to grab, you know, how the stream does its thing sometimes and jumps over specific comments sometimes and super chats where we can't climb back up and grab them. Let me just grab the 2 supers, our superstars that are already weighing in, supporting what we're doing here. And then we'll dive into this article by Conor Orr and my kind of rebuttal. Mike Evans, bona fide super chat superstar here at MHH. We really appreciate you, my friend, with the $10 super.
Thank you, Mike.
He says, who brings more value to the defense, Malik Reed or Justin Holmes? Appreciate y'all. You know, that's a good question. And I guess it depends on how you view the issue. But to me, Zach, Malik Reed at least showed a little something last year. I'm still waiting for a moment where I can go, wow, Justin Hollins, that was a great play. I think he did have 1 sack as a rookie, but the Broncos tried him at off-ball linebacker. It just wasn't good. He just needs to play edge. I think right now you could make the argument that Justin Hollins has more value because he can kind of play too. But Malik Reed played a little off-ball at Nevada as well. So in theory, he could play both, even though the Broncos are only going to keep him on the edge. But to me, it's Malik Reed just because what he brings to the table as a little bit more of a proven pass rusher, even though they were both rookies last year, Malik Reed was a little bit more productive.
it comes down to quality versus quantity for me. Justin Hollins can play two positions, so by quantity, he offers more values. But I think Malik Reed is a better pass rusher at edge, so he brings the quality aspect to the table. I think in this kind of quarterback-driven, passing-driven kind of league, Chad, you have to have pass rushers more than off-ball guys. I think that's, if you boil it down to a position-by-position comparison, edge guys are head and shoulders more valuable to a team compared to off-ball linebackers. So I'm going to go Malik Reed. I think he showed a lot of juice last year. I like what he brought to the table as a UDFA. I just think behind Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, good place to learn.
I think that Justin Hollins might end up having a little bit more upside. I mean, just based on his measurables and just based on his length, based on his explosiveness. But Malik Reed's just one of those, undersized, but really has figured out, despite his size, figured out how to be productive. High football IQ, really hard worker, the work ethic you got to love. And those guys just find a way to stick in the NFL, and they find a way to just get it done on Sundays. So we're hoping that both of them find a way to shine in 2020, but there's a chance one of those two might not even make the final roster this year. It'll be interesting to see how the edge position shapes up. And one more, and then we'll dive into the Bolles thing from one of our superstars, and actually an MHH Mount Rushmore member, David Kilgore, jumping in with a super chat, letting us know, hey guys, sorry I've been gone for a while. Ended up catching the thing that cannot be named.
Oh,
thanks for all that you guys do. Hate hearing that, David. Hate hearing that. Hopefully everything's going okay. Hopefully you're in touch with I'm sure you have been in touch with your family doctor or at least medical professionals on this topic. And our thoughts and our prayers will be with you, my friend. And if there's anything we can do to help out, be sure to reach out and let us know. And otherwise, we'll just keep doing what we do and giving you the Broncos information of the day, some analysis, and hopefully some small escape from going through that right now. But man, we're with you.
Yeah, David, that's terrible to hear. I'm so sorry to hear that. Please be well and get well soon, and let us be your haven for an hour, 4 days a week. Just tune into us, talk some Broncos with us, and get your mind off that issue. Hopefully that your family's okay, and everyone, I'm sure you're taking necessary precautions, everything like that. Hopefully you'll be better soon, and just let us know if we can do anything, like Chad said, to expedite that healing process.
Last one real quick from Eclipse, and then we'll dive in. Really appreciate the support, man. Lately, you've been so outgoing in your support for the podcast and for MHH, and it just means a lot to us, my friend. He says, happy Monday, priests and Broncos country. The number 58 in orange is synonymous with Miller on the back. Future first ballot Hall of Famer. Hashtag state of being. And hashtag let him hate. Love that. Let him hate. Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's true. 58 for this era is synonymous with Von Miller.
Yeah, he's come to be known. If you think 58, if that number in any scenario, any context pops into your head, what are you guys thinking? Von Miller sacking a quarterback. I mean, when you have that legendary type status, you don't, as Chad said, fix what isn't broken. I'd be highly, highly surprised if he made the move to 40 and kind of undid that legacy, as superficial as it would appear.
All right, let's get to the main crux of tonight's podcast. And gang, we're going to come back to whatever questions you might have, topics you want to get to tonight. And of course, we want your take on the very issue we're about to deep dive on here. Is it doing the share screen? It is. Okay, good. So let me just first off set the stage here, Zach, by reading what Sports Illustrated's Conor Orr had to say about why he selected Garett Bolles as the Broncos' most underrated. And there's a reason why this seems familiar, because I believe it was PFF, Zach, and I don't know, a month ago, at some point in May, I'm pretty sure it was after the draft anyway, they came out with their own underrated list and also tapped Garett Bolles. So in that sense, you've got Conor Orr kind of jumping on that bandwagon, as it were. But here's what he said, quote, I may be in the minority here, but I think it's noteworthy that Pro Football Focus noted a year-over-year improvement each season for Bolles, and despite Denver's lack of confidence, they declined his fifth-year option, he is above replacement level at the tackle position, and that is hard to find. Pro Football Focus graded Bolles as the 14th best run blocker and 19th best pass blocker among all qualifying tackles, which, again, in this market is not easy to find. Would you rather deal with Bolles and continue to ride this slower than desired ascension, or spend a pair of first-round picks on someone like Laramie Tunsil, who is better, but not 2 first-round picks better? Close quote. So before we get to kind of my rebuttal on this topic, what's your reaction to Orr's analysis here on Bolles?
I just think he's kind of talking in circles. It doesn't say much about Garett Bolles that he's above replacement level. How does this justify his years of ineptitude? And if he's comparing a year-by-year comparison, that's not saying much. It's like saying Vic Fangio is a better coach than Vance Joseph on a year-by-year basis. It's just when you're that bad, the bar is so low. And it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be Garett Bolles or Laramie Tunsil. They can find a tackle who's consistent, who's above average, who's reliable. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And again, it comes down to not settling. I don't want the 19th best pass blocker who I used a first-round draft pick on, number 20 overall, entering his 4th season with a loaded offense and the best OL coach in the business. I wouldn't call him overrated, that's for sure, but I don't understand how he's underrated when he's been whipped year in and year out. You can talk about the quarterbacks, you can talk about his mental grasp of the game, you can talk about him being a raw prospect, but he's been, for the most part, a disaster for 3 seasons, Chad. So underrated, like you named 5 players, I can name 5 players, a lot more deserving candidates for that honor than Garett Bolles.
I think the only angle in which you can make an argument that Bolles is underrated is his play down the stretch last season. But it was compared to the previous sample size, the 2.5 years of play as a former first-round pick of the team, like it's actually worse. It's actually more of a possible outlier, Garett Bolles' relatively small sample size of good play, than the Drew Lock 5 games as a starter, because you had 2.5 years of just boneheaded Garett Bolles performances, one game after another. So you have to wonder how much it really was an outlier. I think that Drew Lock helped him kind of turn the corner and may even have, in a way, saved his career as a Bronco, not by obviously enough to garner the 5th-year option, but I think you're going to see Garett Bolles continue to play well and continue on that trajectory of improved play. Now, does that make him an elite, or will that make him an elite left tackle? It's way too soon for me to even come close to saying anything like that. But in terms of being underrated, Zach, week 9 on is really the only time we have seen anything even remotely close to a sustained level of quality play or approaching quality play from Garett Bolles, regardless of what PFF grades. Because again, those 14th best run blocker, 19th best pass blocker, that's great and all, but it's based on their relatively arbitrary grading system. So when you start getting into the actual advanced metrics, and there are different metrics for pressures allowed and stuff like that with regard to offensive linemen, there's some real there with regard to PFF stats. But the grades, the rankings are based on the grades. And that's where I don't really take them seriously. It doesn't matter to me that PFF says he's 14th at this and 19th at that, because it's all based on the arbitrary grades. So is he underrated? Maybe in a sense you could say he's slightly underrated, but the most underrated on the roster, that, Zach, is where I have a bone to pick. And in fact, just off the top of my head, really, I threw out 5 players that I see as probably being more deserving of that honor of being most underrated than Garett Bolles. And let me just start with the first one, because I know you'll probably have a bone to pick with this. But Todd Davis, let me just tell you why I think Todd Davis is an underrated player and more deserving than Garett Bolles. First and foremost, we know that Davis doesn't move the needle as a coverage linebacker. However, he is one of the best run-stuffing linebackers in the NFL. He rarely misses tackles. You throw in the fact that he is a very assertive leader, a firebrand, if you will. He's underrated. In the last 4 years, so he became a starter immediately following Super Bowl 50 because Danny Trevathan took the money and signed with Chicago. And so the Broncos put Davis next to Brandon Marshall. And ever since then, he's basically been the shoe-in incumbent starting off-ball linebacker. In the 4 years that he's took over as a starter, he's averaged over 100 tackles per season. And yet he's perennially dismissed and unloved, I think, by a large swath of Broncos fans, and virtually ignored by the national media.
It's because he's so bad in pass coverage, Chad. He's not even just like below average. He's not inconsistent. He's just playing terrible. It looks like he's running in cement boots. If this was 2003, 2004, when the NFL was mostly a running league, if that was still the case, yeah, he'd be underrated. But in terms of this kind of sport, what it's become nowadays, what it's evolved into, a passing league, when you see him running 5-10 steps behind Darren Waller, of all people, that's when you know you have a problem. And some of that falls on coaching for scheming Davis on those players, but I don't think you can be underrated because you're a good run stuffer. I agree. He's good in that area. He's good in that role. He's a decent leader on defense. He has skin in the game. He's been around the Broncos for a while now. I just think he's so bad, though, in one area of his job where it kind of disqualifies him from that label of underrated.
Real quick, let me grab this from Zach. Web Design, one of our superstars, jumping in. Appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, Zach.
His reaction is, like, I understand Bolles is a first-round pick and stuff, but the thing that worries me is between the ears. He really needs to grow before I trust him. And honestly, Zach, I think that is a perspective shared by the Broncos front office. They want to see Bolles put it to – the only thing missing is between the ears. He's got the talent. He's got the measurables. Look what he did at the Combine back in 2017. Impressed the heck out of a lot of NFL teams. The Broncos weren't the only team clamoring for Garett Bolles. Now, maybe someone else, another guy would have been made the first tackle off the board, a guy by the name of Ryan Ramczyk, if the Broncos don't take Garett Bolles. But Bolles was a coveted tackle prospect in what was a very weak tackle class, in 2017. But the Broncos need to see him put it together between the ears. I think Zach's Web Design is 100% correct on that.
But how much longer will we give him to do that, Chad? I mean, how many more excuses and years do we have to take for him to develop behind the ears and between the ears and develop a mental grasp of the game? Is it going to be his 4th year, his 8th year, his 12th year, when he's 30, when he's 35? How much longer will we have to live with Garett Bolles being replacement level even? And let me ask you a question. What other first round pick would it be okay to have an above replacement level tag associated to him? Wouldn't it fly with quarterback? Wouldn't it fly with cornerback? Wouldn't it fly with edge rusher? And those positions, I rank them quarterback, offensive tackle, left tackle, your blindside guy, cornerback, and edge rusher. Those are the most important positions in the NFL. So Garett Bolles plays the second most important position, and he's only above replacement level. That's good enough. Ryan Ramczyk is way above replacement level. He was a first-round tackle, same class. Why can't we have the same expectations for Bolles? Why can't we want the same thing the Saints are getting with their tackle? I understand one's right versus one's left, but I just don't settle on those laurels that he was okay when Drew Lock was starting for 5 games. If he's okay the entire season this year with Drew Lock starting, I will eat plenty of crow. I will say he's improved, he's turned a corner, but to crown him as underrated or to coddle him based on 5 games versus 2 years of incompetency, I can't get behind that.
All right, let me move on to another guy that I think is an argument for being more underrated than Garett Bolles, and that's Shelby Harris. Because in 2 of the 3 years he's been in Denver, he finished within the top 3 on the team in sacks. And that's, for a team that has rostered some pretty prolific edge rushers, that's saying something. In 2017, he finished second. His first year, he was a backup, and he finished second on the team with 5.5 sacks behind only Von Miller. 2018 was kind of a step back. Vance Joseph and Joe Woods kind of didn't know what to do with him for whatever reason. He wasn't as productive.
Shocker.
But this past season, of course, after the Vic Fangio regime figures out we got it wrong, putting him at nose tackle, kicked him back out to where he belongs as a defensive end and a 3 tech, 3, 4, and 5 tech. The production came. He finished with 6 sacks, which was good for 3rd on the team behind Von Miller, number 1 with 8, Derek Wolfe, number 2 with 7, and then Shelby Harris. So I think obviously he expected to find a much more bullish market when he hit free agency this past spring, but I really do think he's an underrated player, and this could be the year where he really proves to the NFL at large, he's back on a 1-year deal, Zach, that he really proves that, look, the 6 sacks I produced as an interior rusher last year, that wasn't an anomaly. Look what I can do with a second full season as a starter, because last year was only his first year as a bona fide incumbent starter.
I was really surprised he didn't get a multi-year contract in free agency, considering the season that he had, and he's a young talent who hasn't reached his ceiling, I think. But it was a weird market for defensive linemen, and when you consider Derek Wolfe didn't get a multi-year deal either, it suggests that the Broncos were viewed differently. It says they don't really see their players in the same tier as the other free agents like Calais Campbell and some of the other players that were available. Shelby Harris, though, Chad, I've watched a lot of 2019 film lately. Every time there's a big play in crunch time, it's always Harris. Whether it's a sack, quarterback pressure, quarterback hit, or batted balls, the guy is just always coming up clutch. And you can't teach that. You can't work on that. You can't buy that. That's inherited in a player through birth. You are born with that quality, and Shelby Harris does nothing but make plays every time he's on the field. So, yeah, no one, I think, outside the Broncos knows his name even, and that's why he's underrated. Everyone knows Garett Bolles' name because he's so bad. No one knows Shelby Harris because he's underratedly very, very good.
All right. Next one here. I would say, and you can pick a bone with me on this, Phillip Lindsey is underrated and more underrated than Garett Bolles. And I know you're into Pro Bowl nod for his sensational rookie season. Then he produces back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons in 2 full years in the NFL. And for that production, Zach, his national profile is surprisingly low because what's been the buzz? What's been the talking points from the national perspective? Anytime the Broncos are talked about as an offense, fantasy, the rushing attack gets mentioned. Everyone wants to talk and focus on Melvin Gordon. I got to remind everybody, Gordon, as great as I think he's a really good running back. I think he's an upper echelon running back in the league. He's got 5 NFL seasons under his belt. Lindsey has 2. Gordon has 1 1,000-yard rushing campaign as a former first-round pick. Lindsey has 2 in as many years and went undrafted. So I think Lindsey remains egregiously underrated in the NFL. And Zach, I think an argument could be made that he's even underrated by his own team.
Right. That's exactly the point I was going to make, Chad. The Broncos didn't think that highly of him, even though he has a 2,000-yard season under his belt, even though he was a Pro Bowler, even though he's worked his way up and became a hometown fan favorite, almost legendary player, considering his stature and where he rose up the ranks from the 6th string to 1st string. He's underrated by his own team. And that should tell you what the national media thinks. They don't even, like you said, they look at the roster and see Melvin Gordon. He's a new workhorse. He's the number 1 guy there. And even the Broncos players have underrated Phillip Lindsey. It was all, let's pay number 30. Let's give him the contract, number 30 forever. Then Melvin Gordon comes in. It's, Lindsey can't catch passes. He can be the second guy in the rotation. He can be the backup. We don't need him anymore. That's when you know you have an underrated guy. And he's going to prove that this season to Melvin Gordon, to the Broncos, to the national media, to the fans, that he deserves to be around. He deserves to get paid. He deserves to be the guy on a team, whether it's the Broncos or another team. So I agree with that. He's way more underrated than Garett Bolles.
All right, 2 more really quick. Kareem Jackson, I believe, is more deserving of saying he's the most underrated player on this roster than Garett Bolles. Now, he's only been in Denver for 1 year, but think back to how impactful Kareem was in his first year in Denver. Was there any justifiable reason he shouldn't have been elected to the Pro Bowl? He posted 71 tackles. He had a couple of picks. He scored a touchdown on defense, forced a fumble. It was enough to earn him Pro Bowl alternate honors, but he still didn't make it into the All-Star game. And before people mention, he was suspended, so that disqualifies him from the Pro Bowl. That's not true. The only suspension that disqualifies players from the Pro Bowl are PED suspensions. This was a DUI suspension. So I think, maybe if he doesn't get suspended, he gets enough stats potentially to get him over the hump and be one of the players to actually appear in the Pro Bowl, not just be an alternate. But I do think there's an argument to be made. I think everyone realized last year how underrated Kareem Jackson was in Houston, what the Texans were missing by letting him leave last year, and what the Broncos have in him.
Yeah, I think the first part of that is way more accurate, that it made everyone, including the Texans, see we really had a good player on our hands. We didn't treat him like we should have. But my personal rule with this is why I've omitted a couple players like Dalton Reisner. I want to see more than 1 year in a Broncos uniform before I consider them underrated. So Kareem Jackson, great safety, huge upgrade on Darian Stewart. He's great pairing with Justin Simmons. If he can do it again this year, I will say he's underrated. But if he does it again this year, he might not have to be underrated. I think he would get enough attention on a national scale.
Okay, I want to throw one more at you, and it will still have the same argument as Kareem as kind of a 1 year Bronco wonder anyway. But I want to get your thoughts on this last guy, and then, of course, anyone that you think I might have missed that you think is more deserving of being considered underrated. But it's Alexander Johnson. it is a little bit of a harder sell to call Johnson underrated because he has that only one season as a starter under his belt. But he did establish himself as an elite run defending linebacker from week 5 on last year, and maybe not a prolific pass coverage linebacker, but I think passable. I think you could get by with Johnson as one of 2 linebackers in any defense. Not just get by, I think you could thrive. He ended up as the 4th highest graded linebacker in the entire NFL per Pro Football Focus, for whatever that's worth to you. But you look at those off-ball linebackers that are graded up there with him, majority of them are Pro Bowl guys or guys who've been to the Pro Bowl at differing points in their career. So he's another Bronco that I think if they had been a winning squad last year, if they had finished with double-digit wins, he's a guy that probably garners some individual accolades, which tells me that if he keeps it going in 2020, maintains that momentum and trajectory, he's probably a lock for either the Pro Bowl or at least garnering some kind of all-pro nod, something like that, Alexander Johnson.
Yeah, it's a good argument you made for him, Chad. And my rule still applies where I want to see him just one more year do it consistently. Then I will say he can garner that kind of title. He was great though. He was a revelation for a Broncos defense that has long been looking for a capable inside linebacker to succeed Danny Trevathan. They haven't really found one yet, and Johnson was just a breath of fresh air on defense. He did for the defense what Locke did for the offense. Just literally raised everybody up, brought the energy level up. He did his little dinosaur dance. He's a very exciting player to watch. He has some pass coverage deficiencies, but he also has the attitude that I love. I read a story from the Denver Post recently, and he said, we know that the book's out on us. Him and Todd Davis were not great coverage linebackers. We want to change that. I love hearing those type of things from players that stay motivated, want to be better. They're hearing the outside noise and using that to fuel him. So I like Johnson a lot as a player. I'm willing to say he's a burgeoning, underrated player, just not there quite yet. He doesn't have a big enough sample size, just like Kareem Jackson in a Broncos uniform.
Okay, I want to get your thoughts on anyone I might have missed, but I know everyone is going to be screaming about what Glenn's saying here. Justin Simmons, why isn't he on the list? And I think it's fair to say that he's underrated, but the only reason I didn't include him in the top 5, he's deserving of being in the top 5. The only reason I didn't include him is because he did earn All-Pro honors last year. So was he snubbed in the Pro Bowl? Yes. And in that sense, he is underrated, but he did earn second-team All-Pro. Justin Simmons. So I get what you're saying there, Glenn, and it did occur to me. I was thinking about that as I was writing it, but I held off because he did garner one of the 2 most coveted individual accolades that every NFL player aspires to last year. So with that being said, Zach, is there anyone, maybe Justin Simmons is one of them, in your opinion? You might have a different argument, but your take.
Simmons was one, but based on what you just laid out, he's probably the 3rd most recognizable Broncos player behind Von Miller and Bradley Chubb. He's starting to really get a lot of national acclaim. He graded out as the number 2 safety in the entire NFL per Pro Football Focus. So I think a lot of fans, not just Broncos fans, know who Simmons is. I can't really think of any because there's so much turnover on the roster the last couple of years. They have so many new starters, so many young starters. I'm thinking still, to an extent, Courtland Sutton. I mean, this is an 1,100-yard wide receiver. He makes ridiculous catches. He snatches souls. He's going to be the best Broncos receiver, I think, since Rod Smith. And yet not a lot of players, not a lot of fans, not a lot of teams really know his name just yet. That will change this season. He will be an all-pro guy, Pro Bowl at the minimum. He's going to have a huge year. But I think for now, compared to the Julio Joneses and the DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, I think he's a little underrated on a grand scheme.
I think you're right. The same thing that with Simmons applies in terms of he did at least get the Pro Bowl nod, so I didn't quite include him. I mentioned him earlier in the piece, but I didn't quite include him. But you're right that he is underrated. And there's 2 aspects to Courtland Sutton's game that, to me, really speak to how special he is as a talent and where he's headed. First and foremost, he was by himself in that wide receiver core. Now, I get it. Sanders was there through the first 6-7 weeks, whatever it was, Emmanuel Sanders, but from then on out, he had to do all the heavy lifting. He was receiving no complimentary help from the Deshaun's of the world, the Tim Patricks of the world. He was a man on an island in that sense. And so it didn't take long for opposing defenses to just start cheating help his way, and yet he still found ways to produce. The second thing that makes me so stoked on Garett Bolles, on Courtland Sutton, is the fact that he managed to produce that 1,100-yard season with 3 different quarterbacks, 2 of which, let's face it, Joe Flacco, he was a shell of whatever the most optimistic opinion you could have, most fair and positive review you could have on Joe Flacco's pre-Bronco career, whatever his pinnacle was. Maybe it was the 2012 year where they won the Super Bowl and all. Whatever that version of Flacco is, he was a shell of that in those 8 games he started for the Denver Broncos. He was a walking liability. And we took a lot of heat on this podcast, and understandably so, for our criticism of Joe Flacco through that first 2 quarters of the season, because it's natural that fans close ranks around their quarterback. Whether his name is Joe Flacco, Peyton Manning, Trevor Siemian, whoever it is, fans are going to naturally close ranks around their guys. Just like if, you can talk crap about, your best friend, but as soon as someone else does, you're going to stand up and defend him. And it's that same principle. But you get to Brandon Allen, Zach, I mean, it looked good for about 6 quarters, and then it went south really quickly. And then, of course, finally Drew Lockett's in there. So those 2 elements, man, I think you're right that he is definitely underrated. And by the time the calendar year of 2020 is over, I don't think that'll be an issue for Courtland Sutton anymore.
No, everyone is going to know number 14 around the NFL. We're all going to see his jersey being a highly, high seller. Everyone's going to know who Courtland Sutton is by the end of this season.
KP jumping in down in Florida with the $5 super. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Kevin.
He says, I don't care if Vaughn wears a blue and orange tutu. If he gets sacks, I'll love him as usual. And his manhood wouldn't be in question, according to KP. Yeah, man, it really, I get what you're saying, that it doesn't matter. He's in the orange and blue. The number doesn't matter. And in the grand scheme of things, the number doesn't really matter. But when we're sitting here on June 29th and Von Miller is tweeting out polls on should I change my number, it's a fun subject to talk about because there's nothing else happening.
And when we had the last, 3-4 months like we've had, Chad, other bigger issues going on, it's nice to talk about football and jerseys. It's a needed question right now. So I appreciated that from that aspect.
That's why we all show up. We as hosts, Vaughn a Beast as a producer and a community shepherd, if you will, our great community. We all tune in here and show up for this to get our minds off of what's happening elsewhere and to talk about something we're all passionate about, which is the Denver Broncos. John on YouTube, now that Cam Newton is with the Patriots, are they title contenders again? And Zach, I'm going to let you answer this straight up, but I just want to mention one thing. Cam Newton went from the street to being in the top 10 or 11 for MVP odds by virtue of signing with the Patriots. What's your answer for John?
I don't think they were ever not title contenders, even after losing Tom Brady. You could say what you want about Belichick, but he would have that team in a position to compete every single season, no matter who his quarterback was. Cam Newton is an upgrade on Jarrett Stidham, but between having Belichick's prowess, they still have a good defense. They still have some pieces on offense. They were always kind of going to be in the hunt. Now, you're not getting 2013, 2015 Cam Newton. You're getting 2020 Cam Newton. We don't know what we have. He's coming off a Liz Frank injury. It's a very serious foot injury, coming off a shoulder. We really don't know what he brings to the table. He's been inactive. It's been a weird offseason. There are contenders for the AFC East, and I feel bad for the Bills who just can't get their break. They've waited so long. I wouldn't say for the AFC, though. I still think, you have a lot of teams in there who are going to surprise this season. I don't think that the Patriots' magic, I think it ran out last year, Chad, with that Titans, that loss. Even though it was Brady kind of breaking down, it just seems like their run is over and they're kind of passing the buck and the baton to the next team. I never thought they would tank, though, for Trevor Lawrence. I didn't think that was a possibility. Kind of crossed my mind, but I knew Belichick had a trick up his sleeve, and that trick was Cam Newton.
I'd be lying to you if I didn't admit that I'm really curious to see how this all plays out with Cam Newton and the Patriots and whether or not – it's not only going to speak to Bill Belichick's wherewithal as a GM, as a decision maker, as a roster builder, and as a coach. But Josh McDaniels, this is going to have to be a very different offense than what Josh McDaniels designed for Tom Brady. So it's going to be interesting to see. I don't necessarily think to tender my answer on this, that it automatically, by virtue of Cam Newton hitting this roster, makes the Patriots a contender, just because, let's face it, Cam Newton has been a shell of the player he was when he won the MVP in 2015. Post that run-in he had with Von Miller in Santa Clara, California, he's just not been the same guy. So there's a side of me that says, how's he going to look? How's that foot going to look? How's he going to hold up health-wise? if those two things end up being okay, if he is 100% healed up and good to go, this is a team that's going to, anytime you have a competent quarterback, and no matter what anyone has to say about Cam Newton, he is at bottom, bare minimum, a competent NFL starting quarterback. And you combine that with the coaching savvy of both Belichick and McDaniels, you're going to have a potent and dangerous combination. So it's going to be fun to see how that shakes out. Let's grab really quick Hardy here on Facebook, who's just making a point, a reaction to what we're saying here. When Drew Lock took over, Garett Bolles showed that he has actually developed into a very good tackle. His problem is he can't not hold when his quarterback holds the ball too long and is not mobile. I think there's some truth to what you're saying there in terms of how Drew Lock helped Garett Bolles in so many ways, That's one of the things that Drew Lock has to really keep in the front of his mind. Every quarterback needs to have, if they're going to be competent, speaking of competency, if they're going to be competent in the NFL, Zach, they got to have that timer, that buzzer, that alarm clock in their head when, to get rid of the football. But especially so because, as Hardy points out, I think aptly, the longer that quarterback holds onto the ball, like Joe Flacco, and is immobile, the more Garett Bolles is going to find himself painted into those corners where push comes to shove and he tackles a dude, because he just runs out of options in his own mind.
I'm going to just throw an asterisk on this. Like, he developed into a solid tackle for those 5 games. I don't understand how that exonerates him for the past 2 seasons. It has to be consistent. He has to be reliable. If he can do what he did last year for a full 16-game schedule, then yeah, we can say he's an above average, above replacement level, whatever label you want to use for Garett Bolles. But until then, I wouldn't say you can't focus on the good and ignore the bad. It goes both ways. You have to take everything into consideration. And for a number 20 overall draft pick, for 5 games compared to 3 seasons, the scales are a little uneven there.
James Campbell, who's going to be on the podcast on Wednesday night, we're going to have him on as one of our superstars and get a chance to talk to him about how he ended up as a Broncos fan in the United Kingdom. But he says, I think the Broncos declined Bolles' option to motivate him and stagger their contracts at the important positions. And maybe, Zach, that's something we can get a more in-depth perspective from James on when we talk to him on Wednesday.
Why do we have to coddle Garett Bolles? I'm not going to keep going on Garett Bolles' rants here, but if we have to decline options, we have to put him in open competitions with lesser players, if we have to focus on 5 games and ignore 2.5 seasons, I don't want to do that from a first-round pick. If he was a 4th-round, 5th-round pick, fine, but not for a number 20 overall draft pick. I refuse to coddle the guy personally.
All right, let's see what else we got here, guys. Here's a good question from Kenneth Booker. Looking back now, what would you have done differently in Super Bowl 48? I would have hit Russell Wilson late, not to hurt, but to show we weren't rolling over. DT took that big hit by Cam Chancellor, and we folded. Man, there are so many things that you go back and do differently if you're the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 48, including practicing with noise, practicing and, preparing for the eventuality that there's going to be noise. But really, Zach, as soon as that ball went flying over Peyton Manning's head on the first snap, it just shell-shocked the Broncos. It really did. It just threw them completely off their game and completely sapped them of their confidence, their energy. And it was like a feeding frenzy. It was like blood going in the water for, a school of piranha. The Seahawks just suddenly fed on that and just went crazy. And the Broncos, they just couldn't bounce back from that. There's so many things that you go back and try and change on that. But I think, honestly, if that snap, doesn't go flying over Peyton Manning's head and it's just another run-of-the-mill first snap of the game for Peyton Manning and Manny Ramirez, it's entirely possible, I'm not necessarily saying it would have been, it's entirely possible that Super Bowl 48 plays out quite differently. However, I think you can't take away from the Seahawks that they came to play that game. It was very similar dynamic to the Broncos in Super Bowl 50. Here you had a very prolific number 1 offense that year, same as the Panthers in Super Bowl 50, that was riding really high, and a defense with a young quarterback in the Seattle Seahawks in 2013 that felt like they were being overlooked and had something to prove. Same as the Broncos, just different quarterback situation in Super Bowl 50.
Yeah, I was going to say what I would have done differently is not have Peyton Manning at shotgun. I'd have him under center for that first snap. And you never know what could have happened. But like you said, Chad, sometimes the wheels just come off, and when it rains, it pours. Whatever cliche you want to use, that's what happened. The Broncos really weren't built to come from behind. They were, again, ahead of you kind of team and just keep the foot on the gas pedal. Whereas Seattle was built where they get a lead, they just, like you said, blood in the water. That's where they were fueled from. That's how they love to play. It was just a worst case scenario, a nightmare situation for Denver. I don't think, Seattle gets paid too. You can argue that nothing would have really changed that outcome. You can argue that it was destiny. It was fate for Seattle to win the title that year. Their defense was just historically good. They had, a great quarterback. You could argue that no matter what would have happened that game, it would have been in Seattle's favor. But that first snap, how it started, it just set the whole tone for all 4 quarters.
All right, this is something that, not to show too much favoritism to Kenneth here by grabbing 2 in a row, but I've noticed this is something he's been asking us a few times that we just haven't ever had time to grab. This idea of Champ Bailey's 2006 season, why he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year. Also, why did they give up on Champ as a returner and a spot receiver? They were going to use him like Dion. Honestly, I don't think the NFL should ever be forgiven for allowing, who was it, Sean Merriman that won Defensive Player of the Year that year, if I'm not mistaken, of the Chargers. Regardless of who won it, there was no question that Champ Bailey was the best defensive player in the NFL that season. It was a phenomenal season. There's no excuse. But Champ was not brought in, the second aspect there, Zach, and I know this predates your time covering the team, but Champ was not brought in to be Dion playing slot, being the gadget guy, being a returner. He was brought in to be the lockdown, shutdown cornerback. They tried him a little bit. Shanahan, played around with him and got in the heads a little bit of opposing defenses, but for whatever reason, ultimately wanted to keep Champ's focus on defense.
Yeah, I mean, they're 2 Hall of Fame caliber cornerbacks, but they're cut from a different cloth. Deion Sanders was 1 of 1, and Champ Bailey was 1 of 1. They did a lot of different things, did a lot of things similar as well. Like you said, they were never going to use him in that role, and they just had him cover receivers. And you know what, Chad? He was pretty damn good at that aspect of his job.
Who was it that won the Defensive Player of the Year in 2006? I know. Okay, so I'm looking at Merriman's. I'm just going to Google it. Now it's bothering me. Defensive NFL.
Kenneth says Jason Taylor.
Jason Taylor. Let me look at his stats real quick. That's far enough back that I don't have that Rolodexed in my brain. Let me just look at 2006. So Jason Taylor that year. All right, let me look here. So he had 13.5 sacks in 2006. That got him Defensive Player of the Year, if that's true. And I'm not saying it's not. I just haven't verified it. Let me just show you guys real quick. Champ Bailey, 2006. So you can see what we're talking about here. Champ Bailey in 2006, 10 interceptions, 1 touchdown, pick 6, had 162 return yards, Zach. 162 return yards. That's more than like half of the league quarterbacks get rushing every year. Fumble recovery. The dude was phenomenal. 86 tackles, 74 of which were solo. Let me see. Passes defense. He had 21 passes defense. So all due respect to Jason Taylor, to this day, I'm with you on that, Kenneth. It sticks in my craw that Champ did not earn that honor because, maybe it was during a time where the NFL was a little bit loath to hand that honor to a cornerback. I think it was Charles Woodson that ended up kind of changing that a little bit, not too many years later in Green Bay. But anyway, Champ Bailey was that was the peak of his career, man. He was in prime form, 2006.
Yeah, miss him.
Miss him indeed. All right, let me see. Glenn wants to know, next question should be the 5 most overrated Broncos. Maybe that's something we can talk about later on in the week. If Monday is any indication, topics-wise, news-wise, it's going to be a slow week. So we can probably get to that. All right, we got a couple of super chats that have stacked up. Let me grab Jeff here. Really appreciate the support, Jeff. He says, come on, Zach. Kareem balled out consistently. So that's one bone that I'll pick too as well, Zach, is just that I get it. Only 1 year as a starter in Denver. But in Kareem's case, one thing that is different between he and Alexander Johnson, for example, Alexander Johnson really only has 12 starts in the NFL under his belt. Whereas in Kareem's case, he's got a decade of playing in the NFL. Last year was his 10th year in the NFL.
I gave him credit for his stats. I thought he fit in really well with the team. I'm just saying I want to see him do it in a Broncos uniform for more than one season. I don't think he's underrated or overrated right now. I just think he's a player on the Broncos who doesn't get a lot of shine or national credit, and that happened when he was on the Texans as well. He was great last year. I'm not disputing that. I just want to see him do it for more than one season in a row. That's all. Man,
he was just I'm trying to think back what game it was that he missed early on in the season. I want to say it was the Jaguars game he missed with an injury. I'm 99% sure I'm right on that. And I remember talking on the podcast after that game, because if you guys can remember, that was another one of those heartbreakers where the Broncos just could not catch a break that came down to the final drive. What was his name? I just had Gardner Minshew finds a way with a little help from the refs to move the chains and get a field goal or whatever it was on the final possession. And they walk off the field with the W, do the Jaguars. If Kareem Jackson is in that game, I don't think the Broncos end up losing that one. And then who knows how that could have altered the destiny of the season ultimately. But Kareem Jackson, what I'm getting at is he was a big-time difference maker for this team last year. It's going to be fun to see him in his second year as a Bronco.
Yeah, plus he's also, 32? I mean, you can't really be 32 and be underrated, can you? So he's getting up there in age as well. He'll always go down, I think, when it's all said and done, as just a really solid, but in most cases, unspectacular player. Very, very consistent, but not an Ed Reed type of safety, not a game-changing Jamal Adams type of safety.
We got Mark Langley, bona fide superstar, jumping in on with a $5 super. Really appreciate that, Mark. And we tweeted out, we Instagrammed Mark's killer, just top shelf YouTube profile pic, rocking the Football Priest hat, rocking the State of Being hoodie. We love it. Appreciate you sending that to me, by the way, Mark. He says, "What's up, my guys? Hashtag buckle up, gang. Garett underrated underwear. Hashtag Garett change your drawers. Hashtag Dookie Bowls. Hashtag used toilet bowls. Hashtag Football Priest. Hashtag Orange Crush. Huddle up pod." We love it, dude. Thanks, Mark. You inject that levity. We need it in each and every podcast. And when you're not in the stream, dude.
Oh, it sucks. Life's not worth living.
Yeah, our mood just suffers.
Yeah. Appreciate you, Mark. It's every time I laugh. It says more about us, I think, Chad, and our sense of humor than it does the hashtags.
I think here too, Christy's talking about Super Bowl 48. She's saying, "I had a huge Super Bowl party, talked so much crap, then I sat on my couch and basically cried." I think almost all of Broncos country was sharing that exact same feeling, because 606 points, Peyton Manning destroying all comers, 55 touchdowns, 5,500 yards almost passing. It seemed like the Broncos were a juggernaut, but what was missing from that could not be beat, but what was missing, who had suffered an ACL. So just those two guys alone, you think if the Broncos have them, and I know Vaughn, that was a real off year for him because of the suspension and then the injury, but if he doesn't suffer the injury, you got Miller and Harris in that game. Lord only knows how it could have altered the ultimate outcome, but still, I think a lot of fans can relate to what Christy's saying there.
I mean, I remember crying during a different Seattle Super Bowl when they passed on the goal line when you have Marshawn Lynch against the Patriots. How does that happen? Still not over that yet, Chad.
Amen. Here's Eclipse jumping in, one of our superstars. Really appreciate you, my friend.
You.
He says, "Besides Peyton, what Broncos do you think will make the 2021 Hall of Fame ballot or induction? If Karl Mecklenburg or Randy Gradishar don't make it, I'm going to flip." Yeah, I don't think Mecklenburg really has a shot, to be honest with you. I don't know why he hasn't really ever made it out of those committees, but who knows, man? I'm hopeful. I think Mecklenburg is deserving. I think Mecklenburg is a guy, played in 3 Super Bowls in the 80s for the Broncos, couldn't quite get over the hump, but he started at all 7 front 7 positions as a pro in the NFL. Think about that for a minute. All 7 front 7 positions. And if Zach was a Cowboy, if he was a Steeler, if he was a Packer, if he was a Giant, even if he was a Dolphin, he's in the Hall of Fame. And the same could be said for Randy Gradishar. I do think, though, that if you had to make a decision between those two, getting back to what Eclipse is asking here, I think Gradishar is the one that has the best chance of potentially joining Peyton as a member of the 2021 class. And then, of course, Steve Atwater will be enshrined officially at the same time as Peyton ends up as well.
Yeah, I don't know. You can talk about Broncos bias and all that. I wouldn't hold your breath on Mecklenburg or Gradishar. Deserving as they are, it just seems like they're not getting enough national momentum for that. Mike Shanahan, though, comes to mind. I think he's a deserving candidate. You really can't think of too many more besides Peyton and Boland's in, Bailey's in, Atwater is going to be in. You can maybe argue Rod Smith or Mike Shanahan, but I think Peyton is the only surefire lock for next year. Peyton and Atwater. If
you're talking locks, absolutely. But there are so many different Broncos deserving of Hall of Fame consideration that, I think the one of the guys in Bronco media that does one of the best jobs at making the case for deserving Broncos snubs for the Hall of Fame is Mile High Huddle's Tom Hall. And one of these days we'll get him on the podcast and let him drop some knowledge on some of these deserving Broncos who deserve to be in the Hall. And he can lay it out for you. I mean, most Broncos fans don't need reminders on why Randy Gradishar, for example, but Tom Hall could lay it out. Lewis Wright, Carl Mecklenburg could lay it out. Even Simon Fletcher, who, although he never garnered a Pro Bowl, Simon Fletcher never even got into the Pro Bowl as a Bronco. But nevertheless, we'll get Tom on one of these days, maybe sometime between now and when camp starts, and talk a little Hall of Fame. It'll be a gas. Let's grab Stu, just showing some love on Super Chat. Zeus, condescending from on high, way up from MHH Mount Rushmore, coming down, showing some support.
Thank you,
Stu. We love you, Stu. Appreciate you, my friend. And also, Stu, for what it's worth, I'm going to reach out to you on Facebook here in the next couple of days or so. Zach and I want to arrange to have you on the podcast as one of our next superstars, meet and greet to the community if you want to. Don't take it as an obligation. It's just an invitation. So if that's something that is in the cards, I'll message you, and then you let me know. We'd like you to be one of our next guests on the show. Here's KP jumping back in. Really appreciate the support, my friend. Bonafide superstar.
Thank you,
Kenneth needs to write a book with his impeccable stat knowledge. Maybe the first copy you could give to Zach for his lonely shelf. # playing Zach.
You know what? I'm gonna keep it purposely desolate for that reason, Kevin, just to tick you off. I'm gonna take things down from the shelf, and let's see what you say to that.
Mark jumping back in again. Really appreciate the support, my friend. Keeps us going. Seriously, it really helps us to keep these podcasts going. The support we receive from the community on Super Chat and continuing to bring you this content, even on a slow Monday on frickin' June 29th. After an entire offseason that was just squashed by the word that shall go unnamed, it's our superstars that are keeping us afloat. So thank you, Mark. Back to my MHH profile pic. This is the way, because remember he changed it temporarily. He was showing on the last pod. # The Mandalorian. # Chad and Mark Step Bros. # Zach is always Perna. # Broncos Country. Love it, dude.
Thank you. Yeah,
Zach. One of these days, Mark, hopefully we get a chance to cross paths with you in the flesh, because it'd be fun, I think, to kick back and share an adult beverage. Christy, as always, anytime she's in the stream, she's showing love on Super Chat, and it does not go unappreciated by your football priest. Christy, we appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Queen Christy.
She says, keep the Bulls jokes coming, though. It's funny, dude. It's good. He's a pro making millions of dollars. It's all good, guys. We can have a little fun at his expense. Let's see here. Glenn, we're running out of time. We're at 58 minutes, so we'll grab one or two more here that's stacked up, and then we'll catch you guys later. But Glenn jumping in with a $5 super. Appreciate you. In these dog days, it would be fun if we MHHers put a campaign together for a player or two who haven't gotten into the Ring of Fame yet. # Steve Watson. Steve Watson is a fair candidate for that. I could think of probably 10 guys, in my opinion, that would be more deserving of Steve Watson. But getting back to Glenn's point, putting together a campaign or something like that, it's something that we would definitely want to we would sponsor, we would encourage from the community, but it couldn't come necessarily from MHH, because MHH, as milehighhuddle.com is a part of Sports Illustrated, we can't really campaign per se for certain things. We've got to maintain objective in the interwebs. However, we could definitely, if our superstars arrange something, got something going, we could definitely get behind that and help push it and promote it and get it out there. So if someone wants to take the lead on that in the community, anyone out there that has kind of some organizational skills, some leadership skills, maybe a little bit of blogging, typing skills, consider it, because we'd be happy to sponsor that.
Make it happen, Broncos country. We're behind you.
All right, let me see, make sure we're not missing anybody. I think that's it. Guys, just kind of a slow Monday in terms of news, but not a slow conversation. Zach, that's the thing, is it could be a dead day from a news perspective. We show up, we have one or two topics we want to get to, but really just the conversation. It's like, I use this as an example all the time, but it's like people, you punch the clock, 9, get out at 5 p.m., head to your favorite watering hole for happy hour. And it's like just hanging out with the dudes that you see every day, and the people at the bar, you're chewing the cud, you're talking about the latest water cooler issues, whatever. Time passes and flies so quickly, and man, it's just fun.
Every time I look up, I see it starting when we're first starting the pod. It's at like 15, 16 seconds when we say let it breathe. And then I look up next and it's an hour and 10 minutes goes by. When you have fun chat, I'll say it again, it's never really work. It's just a passion. It's something we love doing. Super chats or not, being live or not. We just love talking football. And we're so grateful for the audience and the listeners that we have.
And guys, think of this. And by the way, Buana, reminding everybody, leave a quick like before you bounce on out of here, wherever you're watching, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, leave us a quick like. But think about it now. We can keep these conversations fun, engaging, compelling, with not a whole lot of happening as it relates to Bronco land. Just wait, man. Just as soon as the cleats hit the grass in training camp, it's going to be open season here at Mile High Huddle and the Huddle Up podcast. And we cannot wait for that to happen. But gang, that's got to do it for today's episode of the Huddle Up podcast. Thanks to each and every one of you for showing up and for helping to keep the conversation going live. We really appreciate it. Mile high salute to our super chat superstars. Seriously, you guys, it means the world to us. You know that. And really quick, a reminder, make sure you're following the podcast on Twitter at Huddle Up Pod. While you're at it, at Mile High Huddle. And you're definitely not going to want to forget to follow my partner, Zack Kelberman, at Kelberman NFL. And you can find me at Chad and Jensen on Twitter. Gang, we'll be back in the saddle Wednesday, the Huddle Up podcast. And we're going to have James Campbell, one of our superstars in the community from across the pond, on to get, we'll talk some Broncos. We'll talk what turned him on to being a Broncos fan all the way in the United Kingdom, and how he sees specific issues, what his outlook is on 2020. It's going to be a gas, but don't forget to show up tomorrow night for Nick and Carl and Building the Broncos. I'm sure they've got a great show planned for you guys. And Zach, I know we're just kicking off the week, so have a great start to your week, my brother.
You as well, my friend. And I'm looking forward to having James on Wednesday. And we'll just have to hang in there, because we're less than a month out officially. We're 29 days away from training camp starting on July 28th next month. So I can't wait for that to happen, Chad. Like you said, there needs to be cleats on the grass ASAP.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen, Broncos country. Stay positive. Stay optimistic. Remember the PSA from the other night. Mask up is the best way to open the way to ensure the NFL season comes on schedule. So just be aware of that. No skin off anyone's teeth wearing a mask if you walk into a Walmart or whatever. So just keep that in mind. But gang, end of PSA, end of sermon. That's Zack Kelberman. I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you guys again Wednesday night. And we're going to have James on 6 p.m. Mountain, 8 p.m. Eastern. Shout out to Buana Beast. We'll talk to you then.